Hello, I'm Terry Rhodes, Vice President for Quality Curriculum and Assessment. Welcome to AAC&U's Next Generation Assessment Series on assessing student learning and institutional effectiveness. Today, hosts Tammie Cumming and David Miller speak with Andreas Schleicher, Director of the Directorate of Education and Skills, and also the Special Advisor on Education Policy to the Secretary General at the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development in Paris. He will present an international perspective on assessment since the COVID-19 pandemic.
Hello, I'm David Miller from the University of Florida, where I'm the professor in research and evaluation methods and a director of the School of Human Development and Organizational Studies. And today I'm here as a co-host with Tammie on the WebBite series from the AAC&U. And today our topic is an international perspective on assessment since the COVID-19.
Hi, David and everyone out there. Thanks for joining us. I'm Tammie Cumming. I'm the Assistant Vice President and Associate Provost for Institutional Effectiveness at Brooklyn College of the City University of New York. And it is my honor to introduce Andreas Schleicher from the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD. Welcome, Andreas.
Yes, hello, Tammie.
Okay, today we are actually talking about your international perspectives. We had a chance to read your report, A Framework to Guide an Education Response to the COVID-19 Pandemic of 2020. And in it, you had a checklist of points that were important to consider. Number 14 was of particular interest to us because it said it was about defining the appropriate mechanisms of student assessment during this exigency. And so we were wondering if you could talk a little bit about assessment and what are those mechanisms and what are the kinds of things that we're seeing happening during this pandemic.
Yeah, if you want to make equitable and transparent decisions of who can study in what institution and what program, you really need robust processes and a robust assessment. So assessment, I think, is always crucially important. Obviously, countries and institutions have very different policies about assessment, and that has framed their responses to the COVID crisis. I think they have varied as well. You have the whole range from countries that have basically continued using existing exam practices, obviously with physical distancing in place, and you have other countries that have done away with assessment, waiving exams, sometimes in lieu of classroom-based grades. So that's basically, you have the whole spectrum in this. And some systems also are going to resume in-person instruction in the autumn, and that means they're also going to go back to assessment as normal. You think of Denmark, for example, again, with social distancing in place. And then you have a country like the United States, where probably, a good share, maybe the majority of instruction is going to be online. And that means assessment is going to be challenged with this as well. And one of the specific situations in higher education that distinguishes us from the school sector is the autonomy that higher education institutions and their academic staff have, also with regard to assessment. And that basically means assessment is often, very much instructor-based or course-based. And that makes the adaptation to the COVID context really, really difficult. Also, if you look at the learning context, a lot of what we have seen in the last months has been more emergency-based remote instructions than what I would call online or hybrid instructions. Many instructors had no real experience with online instructions. They may have done their best to deliver courses they designed for physical instruction in an online environment. And you can see the same when it comes to assessment. A lot of what we have seen is not what you would like to see there. And the most difficult decisions, most difficult questions are obviously around integrity. We do have actually, I think, quite good technical solutions that have come to the forefront in the crisis, proctored solutions where, the issues around integrity have been dealt with quite well. And the kind of courses that you at AAC&U deliver, I think, social science, I think that's quite adequate. You get a lot more difficulty when you have, work-based learning hosted by firms. How are you going to assess those kinds of competencies? Or programs with extensive clinical components. That's much harder to assess these days, or, lab intensive courses. So those are the programs where I think assessment is very much challenged. In the field of, classroom-based instructions, I think we can also have classroom-based assessments. When you look towards the future, what should institutions do to adjust to COVID? I think institutions that in the near term, best is to look at those institutions that have done a really good job. There are some of those that have actually, many years of experience in delivering online courses and in assessing online courses. They provide great example. In the longer term, I think the big question is, are we going to see a change in the locus of control of assessment, away from this very artisanistic kind of way where individuals design their courses and assessments and deliver them for their students, towards solutions that are, provided by, entities like, companies or big providers that actually curate assessment solutions that are then being deployed in universities. I think that's the bigger question in the long run. Will we see sort of a kind of professionalization and institutionalization of this world of assessment, or, continuing with the way in which we've seen assessment in the past?
You bring up some really interesting points. I know in the United States, we've been talking with our accreditation organizations, which used to be termed as regional, now considered national accreditors, and they really have emphasized that the assessment does not go away, but you brought up a lot of the challenges. So faculty have tried to keep it going, administrators have tried to keep it going, and yes, they're using their courses, but still trying to meet the standards for accreditation for post-secondary at the degree program level and at the institutional level. So that does make me wonder about the Assessment for Higher Education Learning Outcomes project that the OECD has had for years, the AHELO project. I think it's the first time that I was in Paris at the OECD was attending one of the functions that you were hosting for AHELO. Is there any plans to revisit that moving forward, given the pandemic, and trying to get an idea of what's happening out there on an international level with respect to post-secondary? Bring up some really good points.
Yeah, certainly the agenda is more important than ever. I think what we all realize is how crucial good evaluation and assessment and outcome-based assessment really is, and how difficult it is to provide in the environment in which we are now. So I think the agenda of AHELO, I think it's more important than ever. We have actually, since you met with us, we've made actually quite some good progress. We have worked with, CLA Plus. Actually, Finland has been the very first country that has delivered it nationwide, and with a very interesting kind of experience, getting very good participation rate among institutions. And they've also have a very constructive use of the results. I think actually the reluctance, the resistance to assessment doesn't often come from the instrumentation or the process. It comes from how the results are being utilized. And I think that's where we actually need to learn a lot. And but I think the Finnish case shows actually these things can be addressed, and we can actually deliver much better, much more valid assessments. Now, the big issue is, I see, how can we avoid that we sacrifice validity gains for efficiency gains in assessment, which so often happens. And how can we avoid that we sacrifice relevance for reliability? We are often driven very much, to deliver assessments that, are very precise, but then lose sense of, what is really important to evaluate. And I think the AHELO process got out of the box and really sort of, I think, has set a very important agenda. And I do believe it is very important, and I can see good progress. The resistance or the obstacles that we have now, that we are still facing, are not so much of a technical nature. They are more of a kind of political nature. You have countries, you might feel, well, we might not come out as well in terms of learning outcomes and what our reputation is. And the same might be true at institutional levels. I think those are the kind of issues to address. But overall, I think this COVID context has highlighted the crucial importance of having robust assessments and evaluations. There's a big risk is, if we waive exams, there's a big risk that we stigmatize a whole generation of young people. Now, what is the labor market going to say about, their studies if they can't see, anything in terms of results?
Thank you. This has been very interesting, and I know we have a lot of challenges ahead, particularly with the issues you've brought up, the ones of validity, the ones of reliability, even the ones of how we have different expectations for testing in different subjects areas and with different faculty, and how that's going to work with sometimes a need to professionalize assessments, which tend to standardize it more. So I think we have lots of challenges ahead. It's been a very interesting discussion. I want to thank you for joining us today.
Yeah, I think we need to move away. I mean, I think standardization is sort of one corner of it. And what I would call it rather, mass customization. That we do have some procedures that we share and that allow us meaningful comparisons, but that we do not have, one size fits all assessment that then constrains the way in which universities and faculty work.
Right.
Exactly right.
Thank you.
So thank you so much for taking your time. We really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you the next time we're able to get to Paris someday soon, we hope. And thanks again. And until next time, everyone.